Hi everyone. I'm going to do another IT career today, and this one is server admin. Now, what does a server admin do? Well, first of all, I am not a server admin, so if I've made any mistakes here, please feel free to correct me if you are a server admin. But I do work with a lot of server admins, and I have done server admin type stuff myself for different reasons. So, if you want to think of what a server is, like this computer behind me, it's not a server at the moment, but it could be really quickly. So all a server technically is a computer that manages centralized resources. So if I want to run a website off this computer, I can do it. I just need the right software, and I can download that. A server technically isn't much different than any other computer out there. And just to let you know, this computer has been a server before. It has run a website. Again, all it means is that you have something that you are providing out, basically. There are resources that people want, and you are managing them and making them available in a way. So I installed MySQL on this thing a while back, and then I started doing an Apache server. I started running a little website on it. So technically at that point it's a server. I'm managing resources that others can get that are on the outside. Now, in practice, most servers don't look like this, right? Most servers are built to be servers. At that point, they are basically big, strong computers, is one way to think of it. They have higher network capacity. They can, take incoming, outgoing traffic a lot better than, a computer like this with one Ethernet cord. They have stronger processors. Generally, they have multiple processors in some cases. A lot more space, more redundancy is another thing, is that they do tend to have redundancy. That way, if something fails, a drive fails, they're not dead completely. The data isn't lost. And I mean, that's oversimplifying it, right? Another thing that servers tend to do today, this did not used to be true, honestly, not even that long ago, but today we generally use what's called virtualization in servers. And that means you have one physical machine, but it runs what's known as virtual machines. So if you want to talk about what virtualization is, that means basically you're running a whole bunch of computers on one computer. So you have one operating system like I do on this computer, and then I have virtual computers that run through it. So it's almost like I have a whole ton of computers on one real computer. But what does a server admin do? So there are a lot of services. Like I mentioned MySQL, I mentioned Apache. These are basically programs that servers tend to run to provide these resources, whatever they may be, to people. Now, obviously, there's a lot more than that. So a server that I have managed before is known as GitLab, which is used for moving code around, right? Again, a resource, a centralized resource that people need. So that means it's on a server, it's on a machine that is sort of dedicated to doing that in a way. So a server administrator can actually be a lot of different things depending on where you work. You could have server administrators that run really large clusters of servers that do many things, and those processes are all automated. There's something out there called Docker now that makes it easier to automate these things, where you can have a lot of different services, and most of the day-to-day operations of them are actually done by the computer itself. So that is what I would describe as something one type of server admin would do. There's also people that run smaller servers that do a bunch of different things, and that is sort of what your job is at that point, is to keep these different services running, to update them, which doesn't sound hard. Like you might be thinking of the IT person that all they did was update Adobe Reader for people. It's not quite like that. See, today, with software that runs on servers, you can't not update things. And there are changes with updates that need to be implemented, and sometimes there is troubleshooting involved. You can't just let something go out of date, else you could have an Equifax situation on your hands, which was basically they did not update something and there was a known vulnerability in it. And so hackers were able to just take all the data and walk away with it. So as a server admin, you are in a way a gatekeeper, and you are concerned with IT security, and that is why you keep things updated. Another thing you're going to have to do is handle things like installations and new projects. Take me as a software developer, right? If I develop a piece of software, that's all well and good. I can run it locally, but most of my software isn't meant to be used by just one person. It's meant to be used by a lot of people at the same time, and they're supposed to be, sending things to one another. So that is all going to be, handled by a server, basically. And as the server administrator, you not only keep things up to date, but if I have this new piece of software that needs to be installed, you would be able to install it. And that might not sound hard, but it can be. Another thing you would be doing is you'd be good with networks, right? Because the server isn't very good if it can't talk to things outside of itself. It can be a huge powerhouse and have tons of resources and tons of services. If it can't talk to the outside world, that's not going to be any good to anybody. So part of your job as a server administrator is to kind of facilitate these connections and troubleshoot them when they don't work. Now, there are obviously other people involved in that. There are people that do nothing but networking, and the server administrator is but one point of that, basically. So if you are interested in being a server administrator, there are things I can recommend that you look into. If you're looking at the hosting the services, I would start by maybe hosting a database, although a server administrator and a database administrator are not the same thing. There is a good amount of overlap in some cases. Something like MySQL can be a great database. One reason I suggest this is because you have to kind of have a full picture going in order to practice this skill. So on top of that, I would recommend something like an Apache server, right? If those are really basic suggestions. If you want to go with something a little bit more in demand, perhaps, look it up. There's stuff like Node.js, and you'll notice what a lot of these things are is working on the command line. There are people that have written software, and they put them out there with instructions on how to install them and maintain them and update them. So you, as the server administrator, as you're trying to be, go get them. A lot of times they're open source, especially if you're using them for personal or educational use. So go get them, install them on whatever machine you may have, and go ahead and make something with it, something basic if you want to. Then what I'd recommend is see if you can make that visible to other computers on your network. Now, you will be delving a little bit into what a network person does, but not really. Honestly, it's close enough to what you're doing. See if you can open the right ports. And beyond that, it's kind of where you set up your own experiment. Ask your friends. See if you can get it online. That's one thing I'd recommend. That makes it a lot more fun. Depending on your internet service provider, that may or may not be possible or easy. It's almost always possible. Sometimes it's not super easy. If your IP is dynamic, then you're going to have to change it sometimes on applications, stuff like that. It becomes a pain. But it may be worth it if this is what you want to do. So have your friends log in and then go into the logs of the application. See if you can find their login. See if you can trace what happened. Because that may be part of your job as a server administrator, that something goes down, and it's on you to figure out what happened. You have to actually be a little bit of a detective and figure out what went on. Just the exercise of doing all the installations and getting everything connected and working, I think, is good practice. One thing you are going to find when you do this is many servers out there, and there are two, from what I know, there's two real main types of server admins. There are Windows server admins and there are Linux-based server admins. Those are the popular platforms. Now, a lot of these do actually have graphical user interfaces at this point to some degree, but no matter what, you are going to spend a good amount of your time on the command line. And one reason for that is because the server, a real server, may not actually have, you may have to remotely connect to it. There are some things you can do in a graphical user interface that way, but usually you're better off using the command line. And that is one thing you're going to have to learn depending on what type of server admin you want to go for. And I would consider that as you're doing these exercises, because the command line languages, they are not exactly the same, although they are somewhat similar. Learning how to use that command line is actually, in a way, sort of its own programming language. Although sometimes you're sort of programming, it's quite a bit different. It's just, you get around in a GUI in say, a Windows or a Mac machine. Imagine everything you did, you had to type. You know, if you want to view what's in a folder, you have to type a command to do that. If you want to copy a file, you have to type a command to do that. So that is a learned language, basically. But it's not as hard to get good at as you might think, especially with things like installing applications, because the instruction manual will tell you exactly what to do. And there are great tutorials out there that will tell you kind of the basics of it. And if you know the basics and then you start installing stuff, you will start to understand what you're doing. And that is going to be important if you want to do this professionally, because if you are a professional server admin, you would be able to take an instruction and realize that what it's asking you to do is not maybe good for your server. So again, this is a lot from a guy that's not a server admin. I realize that. I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you are a server admin and I forgot anything, I do want to give the normal disclaimer that I do, which is there are a lot of different, jobs that have the title server admin, and there are definitely responsibilities that overlap from other areas. If you like this video, give me a like. If you want to see more of this stuff, please subscribe. Have a good night.